you do, if I'm understanding you correctly, you do seem to have retained the sort of basic idea that if my character dies, he leaves play, I'm still sitting at the table, so we got to do something with me. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I make up a new character.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I am saying that it is a historical and structural thing rather than a given. So, so we'll take a look at that maybe. But those are the two big issues that I want you to. I mean, if you do have somebody like, here's the point: if you do have somebody on who's cycled through your diagram a couple times. So we've seen that, the books change. We've seen the destiny grow. We've seen the various numbers go up and down. We've seen the blights develop. Mm-hmm. And then they get taken out by an axe. That bad bounce comes along, and that's the end of you. And it wasn't consonant with the resolution of any of those things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying, what do we do? And the question is whether that structural element of your character lives on in any way. There is there are ways that people have done this which are quite interesting. Number one, in a book in a game called The Riddle of Steel, which came out in 2002. One of the interesting things was that if your character dies, you do make up a new character, but for no in-setting reason at all, a bunch of stuff in the abstract, like a certain number of dice that you had accumulated with that character, simply gets plonked onto that other character's sheet. They're not really a starting character. They've got a bunch of things. Now, that's no transfer of actual fictional material from character to character. You don't, get his stuff. But you do get these other structural and thematic elements of that character that had been accumulated through play. In terms of raw resource, you do get those. And then there's another interesting, more literal example from a game called The Mountain Witch.
Okay.
And in The Mountain Witch, which is a game with fairly intensive trust mechanics, the character who's killed, the player continues playing and spends points and stuff that were somewhat more metaphysical anyway. But what remains are the benefits of the trust mechanic that the other characters had placed in them. In other words, the character's memory lives on. And the game provides the option for that to be reinforced by actually having the character's ghost be around. Either way, though, with or without the in-fiction ghost, the trust benefits, the trust that other characters have placed in that character, can still be used by that player to enhance or alter roles. So that player is still invested because the memory of their character lives on, and they still have access to certain mechanics. Those are two options. Then there is the option in my game Circle of Hands, in which there is a large pool of player characters, only a few of which are played at any given time, and you don't even have to play the same guy over and over again. Right? You're drawing from that pool of characters. You often see a character played by different players through the course of the game. Okay. And so, but the point is that if a character dies, they're not going to be played again in a later adventure, but they do turn into a wraith with specific powers and limitations until the end of this venture. And so it's sort of an extreme example of the Mountain Witch option, which is still much more literal in this case. So do you see those three, all the way from fully abstract in The Riddle of Steel to half and half abstract and concrete in the Mountain Witch, to completely literal and fictional in the case of the Circle of Hands.
I see. Yeah, yeah.
And also that each one is solidly mechanics based. Each one means that player is still there rolling dice.
Yeah, yeah.
In one fashion or another, that were affected by the presence of the prior character. So did you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
There's room for death in your game to play a much more interesting role than maybe you had considered.
I think you're right. I messed around with a couple of ideas. We used to do this thing. They were called I forgot now. It's on Wraith Points, actually. I think Wraith Points and Echoes and those things.
Right.
And those were like parts of your dead character's resources that go to your new character, and they would spend in fictional ways to alter the fiction.
Right.
As if, the memory of this person.
Right. Again, the degree to which it's literal in the fiction is very much a dial. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've done some stuff like that, but I think as actually character death has been, it hasn't been a huge issue. So it's like something that I guess that's the question. I mean, you'll notice I did note that it is actually pretty hard for a character to die. But on the other hand, if we're talking about the sort of, grimness and grittiness of it all, wouldn't it be interesting to actually validate death as a functional piece of play rather than simply as sort of a rock to dodge? Yeah, I understand. That's good.
So those are just some thoughts. It also opens things up a little bit so that we're not all armored up, sword-wielding badasses. Right? If you have a character who's not a fighter and not sort of fudged into survival all the time, and you can still play them and knowing that the character does have a higher chance to die, but that's not the be-all and the end-all of whether you can play. I mean, one thing that I was interested sort of in the Mountain Witch approach a little bit for you to consider. Not that, what do I do with my new character? That's not the idea. The point is, what do I do relative to the other characters who are carrying on? Is kind of an interesting idea. That the mechanics that persist are more, you can use them regarding other people until such a time as you do decide to bring in a new character. And also you kind of avoid the problem of Ranger Bob. Ranger Bob is the character who steps from behind the tree as soon as your character bites the dust. So, hey.
Right, yeah.
Right. So, sort of avoiding the Ranger Bob problem a little bit. Which in the long run, due to the necessity of, I still want to play, even though my character died, due to the necessity of that, you basically just break the fiction and say, screw the fiction. We don't care. Play Ranger Bob. So, okay, those are just some thoughts. I hope that's kind of worth the time that we spent today to, both of those are enormous issues, aren't they? I mean, both the whole setting insofar as it's really about situation. How does the situation that therefore I bring by making my character and the situation that you bring as the Doomsmith, now your game does require the Doomsmith to look at the books in order to make situations.
Right.
But unfortunately, at this point, neither Doomsmith nor player has been forced to mention region. Somebody's got to mention region somewhere in there, one or the other.
So, with that, I think it's something that I do need to think about. And do you think that the main issue here is that there's no mechanical aspect or there's no draw to say this is where it's going to be?
I don't know about mechanical aspect. What I'm saying is that we have one region at least for each player character. And right now, I don't know what those are. Say I was the Doomsmith. I don't know what regions the player characters actually come from. I know their lineages, but an Asteri from this spot is going to be different from an Asteri from that spot. And also as a player, I would like to know where my character actually was when they got exiled. I'd like to look at that. I'd like to know what it is. Or I'd like to look at a bunch of places and say, ooh, I want to play an exile because I want to be exiled from there.
Right.
And so with those in mind, and a presentation becomes a problem because you do not want to overwhelm people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the next question is, where do we actually play? I'm looking at all the books now, and I know where all the player characters are from. Where is this going to be?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you do in terms of mechanics, procedures, or otherwise, those actual questions do have to be answered, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you do it?
I mean, like in our games, we normally say, hey, okay, we're going to play, it's going to be a game of intrigue. It's going to be in this city. It's going to be...
Right. It's here. So you're saying this is actually in the startup part?
Yeah. I mean, that's normally where we decide these.
Well, then it needs to be a step in the startup, doesn't it?
Okay.
Like actually state it. Maybe even one of the very first things. And it's kind of funny. This is going to sound really crazy. But in a way, it doesn't matter where it is as long as it is somewhere. Since the decision of where play is going to be, it doesn't always really matter. How am I going to put it? There's no point in suffering over that decision. As long as it's somewhere, that's good. And so, therefore, it might be, what I'm trying to say is, how do we make that decision unstressful to become a useful pump toward what we decide next, rather than something that we dither about for God knows how long?
Right. I gotcha.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Because, I mean, people can talk themselves into oblivion over this shit. It's ridiculous. But the point is that decision has to get made somehow. Somebody's going to say so. Whatever way you think would be a nice, reliable way, particularly for people, remember, who are feeling their way through the game.
Which I think is
do it. They say, oh no, I can't decide where play is going to be. I have to read the whole setting book now. I have to read everything. I have to read the whole backstory. Right. Oh God, how am I going to know where to start? I got to know everything. Instead of saying, look, just throw a fucking dart.
It's one of my concerns, I think, is because it's something where I'm like so familiar with everything.
Right.
It's like how to bring that across. If you have no idea, and if you're not playing with me, how do you do some even the most simple things? Because of course it's a new environment.
Situational situational choices and prep is precisely the one place where everybody falls down in writing their game, because that's exactly what they know how to do. That's the one spot, the big gray area. And no amount of gazetteer setting will solve that problem. But the point is that we somehow muddle through it personally. So let's just watch ourselves and find out what on earth we did. So that's the other thing, and then whatever it is you do, then you say, okay, now how does setting help me do that? Rather than paralyze me. Because from the naive reader's point of view, or rather the arriving reader's point of view and player's point of view, the more choice you provide, the more paralyzing it is, not empowering.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Also one of my concerns, yeah.
Yeah. So those are my thoughts, such as they are. And I think that's a pretty solid bunch of stuff for you to chew on a little bit.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Hope all is well.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll be thinking about all this stuff all week.
All right. That's the plan. All right. Take care.
Yeah. All right. See ya.